Colossians chapter 1, verse 9. The Apostle Paul writes to the church of Colossae. He says, for this cause, since the day we've heard, we do not cease to pray for you, to desire that you might be filled with the knowledge of his will and all wisdom and spiritual understanding. Praying for indispensable people. You may be seated. Leonard Sweet has stimulated my thinking as it relates to defining people who are significant in your life as indispensable. People that are important, a necessity, people who seem to help you get where you need to be. Leonard Sweet seems to define these people in 11 different categories, two of which he names one as being an editor in your life, a person who wants you to be your very best. And then he talks about Jethro, the kind of person that pushes you to where you need to be. He says you should have at least 11 of these people in your life that you can define as indispensable, important, and significant. The Apostle Paul understood this because he would write throughout his 13 epistles, or if you will, 12, some say 12, some say 13, but throughout his epistles, he would always seem to have a litany of names. Say hello to such and such. Pay salutation to such and such. He seemed to always have these names so readily on his mind and in his heart because these people, as he defined them, as been co-laborers with him. He uses the word co-labor because he sensed that it is their hookup in the work that has helped him get what he needs to get done for the Lord. Truth of the matter is that all of us ought to have companions, co-laborers, people who are helping us do kingdom work, getting those things which are necessary so that we can accomplish what the Lord wants us to accomplish in the Lord. Paul would pray for these people. Sometimes he would not call them by name. He usually use a plural you to express when he's talking about them. And so he would say in Romans chapter 1, verses 8 and 10, he says, without ceasing, I pray for all of you. He says in Philippians chapter 4, he says, I pray for all of you always with all joy. He writes to Timothy in particular, and he says, I want to pray for your work of faith. I want to pray for your labor of love. I want to pray for how you love God's people. I want to pray for how you have maintained hope. That seemed to always be his kind of framework. I want to pray for your faith. I want to pray for your love. I want to pray for your hope. He says the same thing to the church of Thessalonica in the first chapter. He writes, he says, I want to pray for your work of love. I want work of faith. I want to pray for your labor of love. I want to pray for your patience and hope, because Paul seems to believe that these are the three important things that make up a maturing believer. And so he says, I pray for all of you, because he sees them again as significant and important, indispensable. And I think that is important, my brothers and sisters, when you start seeing people as indispensable, because if you see them as then indispensable, then they will not be the subject of your gossip. They'll be the thought of your prayers. People who become readily on our tongues as people we talk about, we are not really concerned about. They are throwaways. But if we see them as significant, as indispensable, as people we need for the sake of doing kingdom work, then even the most troublesome of people will be the object of your prayer and not the subject of your conversation. So Paul says, I pray for all of you. I pray without ceasing. In the book of Colossae, he begins to say in verse 9, and I pray for this group of people since I heard about you. And notice the word he used, since I heard about you, because at this time the Apostle Paul is in prison. And so all of his information is coming from a guy by the name of Apollos, who brings some information about the people of Colossae. He is the ministry leader for Paul while he's in prison for the city and the church of Colossae. So this is interesting fella, by the way. This might take another subject and another time to preach about it or teach about it, that the fellow who brings the information is as significant as the one who's doing the praying, because if he brings the wrong information, then the prayer doesn't go right. Just want to throw that out for free as a preacher, as a pastor. Then I'll go back and preach to you because you haven't heard preaching in quite a while. And so I want to tell you that the person who is the liaison is as important as the person who's receiving the information, because the go-between can mess up a whole lot of stuff. I know when my mother put me in charge to babysit my brothers and sisters, I would always make sure that I seemed to have a more favorable report for me. So whatever they did, I was doing it better. But you have to be careful who is your information keeper, because sometimes they will cast the wrong light. But this fella did not bring the wrong light to Paul. He says this group of people, he says they are wonderful in God. They received the Lord, and now I want them to grow in God. Did you see the language? He says, now that they're saved, they have to grow. They have to grow and mature in God. And my brothers and sisters, you do need to know that there's something distinct between being saved and then being mature. Because one can be saved and not mature, but one can never be mature and not saved. And so it would look like receiving Christ at night in John chapter 3 as Nicodemus. But when you mature, you come out in the daytime in John chapter 19. Because when mature people mature in God, they don't have to see God only at night. They don't have a creeping faith. They mature. They get excited about God. They don't mind being a light for God. They don't mind testifying about God, witnessing about God, living for God, knowing the words of God, sharing those words, applying that word. And so they come at night, but they then operate and function in the daytime. And so the fella, Apollos, says, listen, as the go-between, I want to tell you that Paul, this group of people at Colossae, they love God, but there's a situation going on in Colossae. There's a group of people called the Gnostics. We're trying to infiltrate them with knowledge. It wouldn't seem bad if knowledge was truth, because all knowledge is not truth.